All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the Million Dollar Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Craig Barlow. Craig, welcome, man. So awesome to have you today.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite, man.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. And I want to start by giving a shout out to Hannah because you and I, Craig, we wouldn't even be talking if it weren't for Hannah. And um, and you know, she sent an email to connect you and I, and she talked about your experience in the military and how he had this happen and this happen and then also survived a sinking ship all before it was only in his 20s. And I'll tell you, boy, she talk about laying it on to where I read that and I'm like, how could you not want to meet this guy and hear? I'm like, I got to hear this whole story. And so she was really brilliant at the way she just connected us and got my attention. I would imagine got your attention, and I'm just incredibly grateful to her. And of course, that's what this podcast is all about: is relationships. And so, what a perfect segue. And so, Craig, what I'd like to do is just kind of start off by turning it over to you so that we can set a little bit of context and you can let our listeners know a little bit about, what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work you do, and even give us some background in that, some of the backstory about how you got into doing what you do, because that's really important as well. I'll start there by turning it over to you, Craig.
Thank you very much, mate. I think I'll go back actually to the backstory, because that's actually the most important part of why I do what I do now.
Sure.
So as you touched on there, is like I was in the military. I was in the Royal Navy for 13 years. So straight from school, from 16 years old, I was off, and I was there until I turned 30. And the things that Hannah was saying to you that are kind of often intrigue people, I always explain my career in the essence of 3 medals, 2 wars, and a sinking ship. And people often, guys from the military often have medals. Is this like, and war is, generally a part of the military sometimes as well, especially in recent years. But sinking ships, not necessarily.
That's right.
Common conversation that people have. So it's always a conversation starter. But this was all before I was 20 years old. And so I actually learned quite a lot very, very early in kind of in the military, of like being involved in situations, not just kind of like training, even though we were at sea for a long period of time, and not like front line, but in terms of still learning quite a lot and being in intense environments, which I absolutely loved as well, by the way. Like the sinking ship experience was like one of my favorite experiences of my life. It was so much fun. And people look at me and like, are you fucking crazy when I tell them that? But I love adventure, so it was exciting for me. But what kind of led me to where I am now and what I'm doing now is actually after I left. So when I left the military, and like a lot of guys and girls who leave the military do, they struggle. And I didn't think that was me, which I think a lot of people do. It's like, this doesn't happen to me. I'm like mentally strong. It's just like I'm the Navy guy, and I kind of felt extremely lost and kind of depressed. It's like I had a long-term relationship go to shit, and like it just felt like everything was falling apart for me, and it was very scary. It was very scary for me. I felt like I didn't know what to do. And the only thing that I could fall back on in terms of like, because I didn't really find the kind of the help that I wanted out there, and I was like, well, I've got to do something, right? I'm coming out of an action orientated environment, so like my mind is geared to action. So I just used what I knew, and like I just fell back on military leadership and like all the training that I had, and all the kind of the mindset and mentality that I learned over the years, and that got me out of some kind of like deep dark holes. And then I started getting coaching for myself and kind of going on the path of self-development. And even going through challenges then is like I always seem to come back to the stuff that I learned in the military, and that mentality and that kind of leadership, which for me is kind of gold standard leadership from that environment. And the more and more it kind of like just naturally geared towards me working with people in high level leadership positions. Of just like, well, I assumed that everybody knew this shit, like military type leadership and all this training and skills and tools. But I realized that actually, like in a lot of corporate businesses and a lot of businesses, the leadership is actually not that great. And I was kind of shocked by this. So I was like, oh, because it's like, again, it's one of those things, something that seems very easy to you. You assume other people know it, and it's not the case. So
Right.
it's kind of like through like a long career in the military and kind of a lot of intense environments and learning quite a lot through action. And my own struggles after leaving, and actually having to put that into place in normal life and break it down into kind of like, how can I use these tools and these skills and this leadership and this mindset in like a day-to-day life and in business, in relationships, in taking great care of myself, etc. And I kind of almost ended up coaching mostly men in high-level leadership positions who are successful on paper, but internally, like, you know, a little bit lost or kind of unfulfilled, or they're struggling in relationships. And that's really of kind of like what's led me into what I'm doing today.
Wow. You know, it's interesting. You know, I work with and serve I refer to them as second stage entrepreneurs, meaning that they are already past the point of needing to create cash flow for sustainability in their business. And now what inspires them to do what they do is making their biggest impact, using their business to make their biggest impact in the world. And I can tell you that, you know, no matter how big somebody's business gets, no matter how successful these entrepreneurs look from the outside looking in, at any given point, man, they have very real stuff they're dealing with at any given point. And in fact, I will even go so far, you know, the bigger the business, the more challenges that they have. And for them, you know, this whole thing of leadership, you know, I mean, that is their role, and they have to become very adept at solving problems quickly. And that's one of the biggest, I mean, that's one of their biggest things right there. And so, you know, I've experienced exactly what you're talking about, and just having conversations with these kinds of entrepreneurs so much over the years and stuff that, that's totally reality, you know. And well, okay, so now that we've got a little bit of context set, and people have, you know, listeners have an idea of who you are, Craig, and what you're all about, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, and I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners. So, Craig, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons who completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Craig, I'm just really excited to hear your story around this topic of relationships.
Yeah, so like as we briefly spoke about before in this, is like, I think there's obvious ones for me in terms of like mentors from the military. So having kind of mentors throughout my career in the military. But the one that actually came up to mind is like, if I could just pick one, is just like, was actually quite a recent one, to be honest. This was like about a year ago, and it's a man by the name of Joe DeSena. If you know him, he's the founder of Spartan Races. He's a little bit crazy. He's kind of my type of guy. And I met him at a weekend kind of entrepreneurs impact event here in Ibiza, where I live, which is fantastic. And I was like, he's the only guy I really want to kind of speak to and spend time with. And he was doing his Spartan workouts like in the morning. And it's full of like extremely successful entrepreneurs, like crazy levels of success and wealth. And you can see that, like, you know, he's putting on this workout in the morning, and you see who turns up, right? You see who turns up at like silly o'clock in the morning to go and do a workout, right? Well, or you got a lot of people talking about health and success and biohacking and habits and discipline and all this. And then a lot of people were like, you know, getting shit-faced, staying up all night to early hours and that, and then getting on stage and kind of talking about something that, you know, they're not really demonstrating that they practice. And that kind of doesn't really sit well with me. So it's just like, he's like, you're hearing a lot of these people talk, but I'm like, I can't take you seriously. But in the mornings, he's like, Joe would have these workouts on, and I turned up like 15 minutes early, like a good military guy. And he was already there working out. And I was like, okay, kind of like a little bit of a gamifying it in my head a bit. So I was like, in a way, I was kind of like, oh, fuck you. So the next morning, he was, I'm like, I'm going to turn up an hour early tomorrow because there's no fucking way you're going to be there an hour early. And so I turned up an hour early and I did an hour workout before everyone else turned up. And then we did the Spartan workout. And then we did this for over the few days, and we went and had breakfast, and just being around him and like seeing how he spoke to people, how he treated everybody, how kind of like his mentality, how he connected people, and like how people were drawn to him, and just the level of ease that he had in normality. But also you could tell he was very grounded. He's very much who he says he was, and he like lives and practices everything that he preaches. And that was the thing that stood out for me. And I almost felt, it sounds a bit maybe cliche, but I also felt seen in that, because sometimes I think I'm a little bit mental and a little bit kind of like crazy and like sometimes misunderstood by people around. But when we were having conversations, when we were working out, it was like, I was just like, oh my God, that's how I think. Or holy shit, it's just like, I say that. Or like, that's my beliefs in this area, or that's my kind of attitude. And so it's really affirming for me in a way, in terms of like, it's like, oh, we're quite similar. And like, there's some parts of that I would probably reject about that in myself before. And just spending time around him, and the way he spoke to me and kind of treated me as well was like, it was just, his whole attitude was fantastic. And like how he was just completely, why he was so chill and grounded was because he just was who he said he was. Yeah. And he lived everything that he actually spoke, and it was all extreme basics. And this is one of the big parts as well, because sometimes when I'm coaching people, I'm like, this is so simple. It's just like, you're paying me a large amount of money, and I'm like helping you with things that are like very basic and simple, not remembering where I come from and my background. And it was kind of like, there was so much clarity that I got from this. It's like helped me in terms of my own business, and also one I have with a mutual acquaintance of ours, Callum, in terms of our men's mental well-being business, Wildman. And it kind of like made me see as well of like working with men as well, as like how it's just like, is people really miss the simplicity and the absolute basics and the absolute fundamentals, because we want the shiny shit or the sexy stuff, and we can't be bothered with the mundane, the boring and monotonous day-to-day stuff. But for me, what I find is like, that's where the best shit comes from. That's where your progress and results and your growth comes from, for the most part. And I find that's what most people kind of don't master. And I think really that's a lot of what I bring to the kind of these guys who are already very, very successful, is they're kind of missing that really kind of almost basic kind of piece that everybody knows, right? And everybody talks about, and like, oh, I know that, but it's just like, yeah, but you're not living it. It's not who you are. You're not living it. And like, that was a really powerful weekend for me that like shifted like so much, and like I felt very confirmed when I left there.
Yeah.
As well, and like so that was probably one of the most profound experiences I've had, to be honest.
Wow, that's huge. That's huge. You know, and the word that comes up for me in that is just alignment. You know, that what you saw in Joe, you know, that, you know, I made the note here, you know, talk versus actions. You know, people can say one thing,
Yeah,
but if their actions are incongruent with
yeah,
what they're saying, well, we recognize that they are out of alignment. And so
yeah,
therefore they're not going to align with us,
yeah,
especially if that's what we look for is relationships that are in alignment with us, in alignment with the way we want to show up in the world. And that's the other big piece too, is that alignment with ourselves. You know, so
yeah,
often, well, I know I grew up being extremely concerned about what other people thought of me. I wanted to be
yeah,
liked. I wanted other people to just enjoy being around me. And so I tried to show up in a way that would, well, if I act like this, then they'll like
yeah,
me. Then other kids will like me, you know.
yeah,
And you know, so many people do that.
yeah,
They show up in a way that they believe, well, other people will like me if I show up this way, or other people will do certain things for me if I show up this way.
yeah,
And yet, when we get to this point where we just realize that, you know what, people aren't really thinking that much about me at all. In fact, they're mostly concerned about what does everybody else think of them. That's where they're spending most of their time in their head, you know.
yeah,
And so when we just show up as our just genuine self, complete with what
yeah,
we might consider our faults and what have you,
yeah,
and you know, because the reality is that we all have like maybe a handful of things at the most that we're just like really, really good at.
yeah.
Most other areas in our life we totally suck at. And it's okay because that's how we all are. We're
Yeah,
all
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
way,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
And when we just show up, what my buddy Jesse says, with nothing to hide and nothing to prove,
yeah,
man, what a weight is
yeah.
lifted off our shoulders.
Oh yeah,
And then people are like you said, they just feel seen, heard, and understood
yeah,
around us, and they're like, people are just the right people are just attracted to us,
yeah.
you know. And
It's it's something I took from the military as well. Is just like why I'm like why was everything so easy in the military? Because in the military everyone's fucking nuts. Like you know this. I have to say this. Everyone's fucking nuts, and it's awesome. Everyone's weird as fuck and just crazy, but you still get shit done and you still perform at a high level. So it's
yeah,
like nobody really kind of really judged each other because it was so much fun and everyone was free to be themselves, and it was like very non-PC, dark humor. You could say what you fucking wanted, no one would get offended,
yeah,
and if they did, you didn't give a shit anyway. You just get over it, and is like that's I'm like, oh yeah, that's one of the main things that allowed me to perform very, very well. And I call it like I have like a phrase is just like in terms of part of my branding as well is like is action, man. It's like have fun, get shit done, especially for men, because it's like we get very serious and stuck in our own heads and dealing with all the internal shit that we don't want to talk about or we don't want to look at. And it's just like it's for me, it's way too serious. And like how we used to deal with things in the military was like actually very helpful. And you'll like this as well, like when you're talking about kind of not really caring what people think. Because when I go to like events and things with Hannah, she says, "Oh my God, you give me so much anxiety." I'm like, "Why?" She said, "Because people ask you questions and you tell them the truth." And it's like she says, it gives me so much anxiety because it's like it's because I think she might be a bit more uncomfortable with that than I am. Well, I don't care in a sense what people think. I'm not being a dick. I'm just like if someone asks me honestly, like, "Oh, what did you think like to our event or something?" I'll tell them that I'll just tell them the truth or have an honest conversation. It's just like because I'm not thinking of just like, oh, is this person going to like me? I better say nice, really nice things. I don't care.
Yeah.
And that feels amazing. But like Hannah gets like, which actually makes me enjoy it even more because Hannah gets anxiety. So that kind of sadist in me is just like where Hannah feels uncomfortable. I take like a lot of enjoyment out of that.
Well, so if you look at your interaction with Joe and stuff, and it was obviously incredibly profound. And if you look at what has taken place in your life since that experience a year ago, what is an example of an opportunity that you had to make, where you got to make a really big impact, and hands down, that would have never happened if not for that experience that I had with Joe?
Well, it actually came out of the workouts that we were doing as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
So when we were doing those, and like I said, I was like turning up an hour before and doing like an hour on a treadmill, then we do the workout, and then I'd be like absolutely killing the workout as well. And people are like, "You're a fucking psycho." It's just like you've done an hour workout before this, and now you're like this. And and I think that for me is just like I have a thing like we're talking about action is just like it's how does somebody actually show up, and how does somebody, like, we can sit and talk, right? We can sit and talk about who we are and kind of what we do and what we can do, but it's not until you put into action that you can demonstrate this.
Yeah.
So I found that from this weekend is just like where is from having these conversations and workouts and actually contributing to the workouts with Joe as well as is he put me in contact with a guy. He says you should team up with this guy and do like one of your wild man events here that you do for men and team up together. So I got to connect with a guy who does there's a company called Highlander, and they do like a global adventure of a lifetime, it's called, like adventure challenges.
Okay.
And he's like, oh, you should come and do like a real kind of like, a real fucking hard one for people who want to kind of like stretch themselves kind of like further. So we got to connect with that as well, and like we're collaborating on some events next year. And also it helped me kind of start to propel the brand that I have with Callum, which is called Wildman Challenge, which is all around men's it's specifically for men. It's like men's mental well-being, like in the men's workspace, is helping men. But for me, I find there's too much sitting around and talking, especially like in the men's space and in a lot of self-development. There's too much sitting around and talking, and not enough putting shit into action. So we're kind of like we have the motto: action first, chat later. So we kind of like let's get shit done, and let's fucking talk about it afterwards. Not just sit around saying shit and it's empty and then nothing happens. For me, that's a huge problem for men, like at all levels. So it's really kind of like it's really helped me to kind of is to propel that more into our brand, and obviously have collaborations and connections that is just amazing. It's just it's perfect for us. So that's been huge over the last year, and we're now like kind of on a very, very good trajectory. It's like the hockey stick analogy, where like for a long time you kind of like this, and then all of a sudden you take that kick. Is like that's kind of where we're at now with that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Wow. Well, for anybody listening to this right now, Craig, going, man, Kevin, I really like Craig. I like who he is. I like how he shows up. How can they find out more about you and the work that you're doing? Any resources that you can share with them?
In terms of like where to find me?
Yeah,
or
website
resources. Okay.
or social media, whatever.
Okay. So I suppose the best place would be socials. You can find me on probably Instagram.
Okay.
At the Craig Barlow.
Okay. Okay.
Facebook is just Craig Barlow. And I also have a podcast called Leading Men.
Very good.
As well. So in terms of resources, and people can kind of listen and digest some more, which is specifically around pretty much around men and leadership and relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, Craig, I really want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation, because I know, the big thing that has inspired me most about hosting this podcast is the impact that we get to have on our listeners, which is, they too are entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs. And I just want to, through having these conversations, being able to, just inspire them to place an intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their own life. And we have definitely achieved that today with your help. So I want to thank you for that. Any last thing you feel just led to share before we call it a wrap?
Not off the top of my head,
Okay,
Kevin, to be honest.
Fair enough. I always ask that question just in case there is.
Just in case.
If there's not, then we already did our job. And so that's totally cool. Well, Craig, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. Really appreciate you. This has been absolutely awesome. So thank you.
I appreciate the invite, man. It's great to speak to you again as well.
You too.